You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. How do you get through your first 30 days alcohol-free? What do you say to your friends and family? What do you do when cravings hit? Well, that's what we're talking about in today's episode with my good friend Charlie. We're getting back to basics and covering some of the most common challenges of getting sober. I love talking about sobriety with Charlie, who also happens to be the host of the very popular recovery podcast called The Way Out. We have a lot of fun, but he is very sincere and serious about providing the right information that can help you get sober. Anyways, I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Charlie and let me know what you think. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for coming back.
Arlita, super happy to be back.
I think you're the only one who's been on 3 times. This will be your, yeah.
3 times a charm.
3 times. You are damn charming. That's that's so true. And listen, every time I talk to you, I was like, damn, his knowledge of recovery is so deep. You have such a really good grasp on, especially like 12-step literature, and you have you're solid. I like the way you think. So I was like, come on back.
And we're 12-step homies, right? So
yeah. And so I thought it would be good to just do sobriety 101. How to quit drinking. Let's just go over the basics.
I love it.
Because it's so easy. You and I have been sober a long time, and it's easy to talk about all the different nuances of sobriety. And I haven't really spent a lot of time, focusing on the fundamentals. And I thought, in case somebody is brand new to us, they should understand maybe some of the fundamentals. So I would love to get your perspective on that.
I love it, Arlita. And I can't wait to dig into Sobriety 101. I just had the opportunity to share my recovery story at 2 different 12-step speaker meetings. And so this has been on my brain because one of the things that I really try to do when I share my story is really tailor it to the newcomer, the person who's still suffering, and really identify those things in the beginning that made all the difference.
So we're going to cover navigating your first 30 days. We're going to talk about cravings, how to talk to your family and friends about what you're doing. We're going to talk about the action cure. And we're going to also talk about underlying root causes. I know you've been reading some Gabor Mate. I love that guy. He's got such deep wisdom. So, is the book you're reading The Myth of Normal right now, or is it?
I just got done with The Myth of Normal. I'm smack dab in the middle of In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts.
What is the premise of In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts?
The premise is that Gabor Mate, for those who don't know, is a well-known doctor, MD from Canada, Vancouver area. He spent a lot of time in the last couple decades in the worst part of Vancouver treating the most hardcore substance abuse sufferers, what you would think of as the most hardcore of the hardcore. IV drug users that are consistently unhoused and exposed to all the things that you would think you'd be exposed to in that kind of environment. And his central thesis is that the substance abuse recovery community, treatment community, has largely ignored how important of a role trauma and adverse childhood experiences play into the susceptibility of an individual to substance use disorder and to the severity of substance use disorder in individuals, as well as how we would address a substance use disorder within individuals. So it's fascinating, and it really lines up with my experience on the Way Out podcast, interviewing hundreds of people, and the vast majority of them indicate some sort of adverse childhood experience, trauma, or both in their childhood. And
Yeah,
so it's a really consistent with my own experience around folks who have a substance use disorder, and so I think it's really important work.
absolutely. I'm going to have you look at the camera because I publish video.
Oh, jeez.
Sorry. It's all good. Okay, well, let's talk about so that's actually in line with underlying root causes, and I'm going to circle back to that. But let's kind of start out at the beginning. Let's say somebody is first starting they're like, okay, I am clear that moderation is not working and I need to practice abstinence. Like, let's just assume they've answered the question, can I moderate?
Sure.
And let's how would you go about advising somebody about how to get their first 30, let's say?
Mm. So when I think about making that decision and finally coming to a point where the decision's made, moderation doesn't work, tried that, I need to stop. And what does that look like? I think the first thing is to identify if there are resources, support groups, those kinds of things that you feel like you might
Mhm.
be willing to try.
Okay.
And there's a lot of them out there, but that's the most important piece in terms of that next step. Who am I going to get to help me?
Okay. Okay, so get help.
Help. What kind of help am I going to get in touch with? It could be, depending on where you're at from a substance use. If you've got some physical dependency and you're concerned about withdrawal, then treatment's the right answer for you.
Yeah, like detox or
You got it.
medical, yeah, go see your doctor.
You got it. Yep. Talk
Okay.
to your doctor, talk to somebody that you can trust within the substance abuse treatment or recovery community, if you know anybody in that community. But certainly if there's any concern about physical dependence, then do not detox alone, do not try to withdraw alone, regardless of the substance, if there's a physical dependency.
Okay, so that's get help for physical dependency. And then you did mention community, which is peer support. I like the two kind. There's in my mind, there's two kinds of
Mm.
support, peer support and professional support.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yep, you got it. And both can be very helpful in your next step in terms of being able to begin your recovery journey, your sobriety journey. If you're able to and comfortable with engaging with some professional support in the form of substance abuse treatment, that's a great option. Certainly something that I did and worked. It was instrumental in my own recovery. I've known
Mhm.
a ton of people, however, that did not go through treatment and went straight into a peer support group, whether that be 12-step or otherwise.
That's what I did.
And yeah, exactly. And that's just as valid of an option.
So let's cover a couple of options. Listen, you and I are both in the space. We're exposed to a lot of tools, and I'm using this tool right now called Relay. And it's where people can get online anonymous support. They put you in small groups, and it's
Sure.
really cool. And somebody in this group mentioned that they didn't like AA. And that's fair. And
Mm-hmm.
when you do a little, of course I have to do a little digging and be like, well, why?
Yeah, of course.
You
Yeah.
know me. I need to know
Yes.
why. And it's so interesting because there are things that are common in 12 step that aren't actually in the literature. For instance,
Yeah.
he was bucking the idea of 90 meetings in 90 days
Sure.
and
Yeah.
just very resistant to it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's actually not in the literature. So if you don't want to
Right.
do that, run the listen, you gave me run the experiment. I have been running that one. I love that. Run the experiment. Don't do
Run
it
the
then.
experiment. Don't do it.
Don't do 90 meetings in 90 days and see how that works for
It's not a
you.
requirement. The
It's not a
only
requirement.
requirement for membership in any 12-step organization is a desire to stop.
Yeah.
That's it. A
Yeah.
desire to stop. That's it.
That's it. But I was wondering, like you came to mind, and I go, I wonder what Charlie would say about, he goes, oh, I talked to this guy and he couldn't give me a logical reason why 90 and 90. And I go, I wonder if Charlie
Oh,
has like in my mind, I'm like, run the
100%.
experiment. If what you're
Oh,
doing
yeah.
isn't working, try but
It's about
what
getting
would
in
she
the
say?
middle of it, right? So 90 and 90 is such a great way to be able to expose yourself to all that the 12-step program and a fellowship can offer. And what you're doing is you're giving yourself an opportunity to hear a lot of different recovery stories so that you have the opportunity to identify with a wide array of people.
Mm-hmm.
I go to one meeting a week, and that meeting has 12 people in it. Well, I'm going to hear bits and pieces of 12 people's recovery stories, which is good. But if I go to 5 meetings a week, or 7 meetings a week, or 10 meetings a week, the amount of people that I'm going to encounter increases dramatically. The amount of stories I hear increases dramatically. So my opportunity to identify increases dramatically. And that had been my experience. I did 90. I did more than 90 and 90.
I know I did too. Overachievers.
Yeah. All or nothing, baby.
But do you know what? There's something about immersion learning that is
Yes.
faster and more powerful. Like I, had when I was raising my kids, I had friends who sent their kids to Spanish immersion schools
Yep.
so that their kids could learn Spanish. Or like I did a Tony
Yeah.
Robbins event where it was like 14-hour days for I forget how long it was, like several days. Right. And the idea is immersion. You learn faster and deeper in immersion. So,
Yes, you're immersing yourself in a community of people that are trying to do the same thing you are.
yeah.
And you're more likely to meet people that you identify with. You're also more likely to meet people that are where you're at
Hmm.
in their recovery, and you can relate from that perspective.
Yeah.
They're struggling with the same things you're struggling with, so
Yeah.
you don't feel so alone.
Right.
And it also eats up some time, which doesn't hurt in the beginning, to eat up some of that time, because if you're anything like me, I didn't know what to do with myself when there was nothing going on. And what I
Yeah.
did prior to trying to get sober was, well, drink and use. Okay.
Right.
And so having my evenings primarily eaten up by a 12-step meeting, and then just generally just trying to sustain my human needs like eating and whatnot was great. Because by the time I went to bed, the day was over and I was sober and life was good.
Yeah. I would also add opportunities for service. Like if you want
Yes.
to build self-esteem, you do esteemable acts, and service is the fastest way that I know of.
No question.
One of, yeah.
Yeah, no question. And you're gonna invariably find people that have what you want. And you're gonna hear
Yeah.
stuff that's gonna change you, that's gonna really strike a chord with you and make a difference. And you won't be able to predict when that
Yeah.
happens or who says it. But the more you expose yourself to those opportunities, the greater the chance you're going to have those aha moments, those moments where, like, oh my gosh, I felt like that. Oh my gosh, I did that too.
Yeah.
And if I felt like that and they did, and I thought like that and they did, and I did that and they did, and they got better, well, maybe I can get better too.
Yeah. I love that. I also love this idea of positive brainwashing. Like we're reviewing the solution over and over and over again, and it sort of edges out negative thinking that led you to drinking in the first place. So I remember I was dating this guy when I first got sober, and I quickly realized I needed to break up with him. And I was going to meetings, and he was drinking and whatever. And he told me that he goes, I think those people are brainwashing you. And I was like, yeah, I know he meant it in a bad way, but I was like,
Right?
yeah, my brain needs some washing. I was like, you're not going to get any resistance from me. That is exactly
Well, it
what's
reminds
happening.
me of your great 12-step joke, which is that's you know again the difference between
I have a
you
12
know
step joke.
I thought you did
What is it?
the what's the difference between occult and AA?
What? I thought you
In,
thought, what is it?
in occult, people actually do what they're told.
Oh, that was you. Yeah, you told me that one. Yes.
I got another one before
What's
we
that?
move on. Okay, another 12-step
Okay.
joke. Okay.
Okay.
So a sponsor and a sponsee are stuck on a deserted island. They're walking along the beach and they find a bottle. The sponsor picks it up, wipes the bottle off, and out comes a genie. The genie says, you each get one wish. The sponsor says, oh, I wish I was back with my home group. Poof. Sponsor goes back to the home group. Sponsee, he's like, oh man, I don't know. I don't know what to wish for. I wish for like an airplane, a boat, food, a woman. Oh, I wish my sponsor was here.
Fucking sponsees.
Leave it.
I don't know what to do.
Oh,
If only my
poker.
sponsor was here. That's awesome. But I'm bummed. I didn't know you was gonna tell jokes today. That's awesome. Just a quick note, and we'll get right back to the show. Since we're talking about how to get sober, I wanted to share a free guide called How to Get Sober 30 Tips for Your First 30 Days. In it, you'll find strategies to overcome the most In it, you'll find strategies to overcome the most common challenges, a sober toolkit, and a printable checklist of all 30 tips that you can reference at a glance. Just head on over to soberlifeschool.com to grab your free copy. Now, back to the show. Okay, so that's a very good answer to the 90 and 90. Um,
And then again, run the experiment. Okay.
yeah,
You
if you don't
if
like it,
you don't like the results, will happily refund your misery. Okay. So whatever program you decide is right for you, whether that be 12-step or otherwise, run the experiment to the best of your ability. See what happens. What we've demonstrated, if we've gotten to the point where we know that we can't moderate, is everything that we've tried up to that point didn't work. So let's be willing, and willingness is key. Just a shred of willingness to try something different, run the experiment, and see what happens.
okay. You know what really broke my heart is when I was chatting with this person on the Relay app about my sponsor couldn't give me a logical reason. You know what they were told was that if you really wanted to be sober, you would do this. And if you
Mm,
don't, then you don't really want to be sober. And I cringe at that. I was like, that is not logical.
no,
You don't have a stroke. You look like you're
that
gonna have a
is
stroke. It's so upsetting,
it
right?
did.
Because
It's upsetting. It
it's
it
lack of
literally
compassion.
caused my brain to hurt.
I know.
I know. I'll shame them. That's what.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me that kind of thing drives me crazy. So
Me too.
it doesn't we need to meet people where they're at, and
You
shaming
got
them
it.
is not
You
working.
got it. And
Yeah.
it that person was asking, begging for a reason. And there's lots of really logical reasons to do a 90 and 90.
Yeah.
And also, you don't have to.
And also you don't have to. You might not need to. I don't know.
Not
I love
there's
this that
many people that have long-term meaningful sobriety that never did a 90 and 90.
Yeah, or never went to a meeting.
You got it.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Okay, I'm glad you're not crazy.
That makes two of us.
All right, so navigating the first 30. So get help, talk to your doctor, peer support, and professional support. I would also be curious to your thought in terms of professional support, not just detox. Um, you know, and this sort of leads to the underlying root causes and conditions.
Mm,
You and I both did EMDR,
yes.
which is like a somatic therapy. So that's another way of accessing if you have access to that, like professional help to address the underlying causes while developing a support system to get you through day-to-day stuff, because your professional person isn't going to be available 24/7 like your peer support can be.
No question about it, Arlita. And when we are now launched into sobriety and we're getting familiar with a program of recovery, we're meeting folks that are on some in some level or another on the same path as we are, then we have an opportunity to be able to reach out to other professionals as they may be helpful. As we touched on off the top, many of us who have a substance use disorder have experienced some sort of trauma, some sort of adverse childhood experience, some sort of even PTSD. And I know for me, for sure, I needed to address both in
Yeah,
order to really unlock my recovery because they
yeah,
kept sabotaging each other. My substance use was sabotaging my mental health and my trauma stuff, and my trauma and mental health was sabotaging my substance use disorder, right? And
right.
so I'd get stuck in like a pit of, emotional overload and need to hit the eject button,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then by virtue of engaging in substance use in that cycle, it made my mental health worse, right? And
right,
so
right.
I needed to definitely address those both pretty early on. Not everybody does that right away pretty early on, but certainly if you have some struggles with mental health and you know that you've had some adverse childhood experiences that you haven't fully addressed, and Arlita, I know it was great in the show notes, so we can put a link to that adverse childhood
The ACE,
experience. You bet.
the ACE quiz or
The A
evaluation.
score quiz.
ACE score. Okay, yeah. Okay, I will do that.
For every adverse childhood experience we have, we're 2 to 3 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder.
Well, listen, I had zero chance. Okay, I had zero
If
chance
you've
of
got 5 and I've got over 5, 7 to 8, depending on, one of them's a little like, you'll see if you
a little
take
gray
this,
area.
you bet. You're 10 times more likely if you've got 5 or more.
Flavor. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, and I would also like to point out that I recognize that if you're a chronic relapser, I would bet money. I'm not a gambling girl, but I would bet money that there is underlying trauma
A
that you've
hundred
just,
percent.
yeah,
Yeah. That
dissociated from.
you keep sabotaging or some sort of mental health disorder that may be also,
Yeah.
triggering that. But no question, I'm not a betting man either, Arlena, but I certainly would bet money on that if I was.
Yeah, and that is a way more compassionate look at why people relapse, chronic
Yes.
relapse
Yes.
is, I don't like the shame. Like the one thing I don't like about, when you go to an AA meeting and you relapse and you come back and you announce yourself as a newcomer every day for 30 days, your first 30
Mhm.
days. If you're a chronic relapser, that is like re-traumatizing you with more shame. And we walk around with like, it's hard. Like I see it, there is a purpose to it. I interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke from Stanford, and she wrote that book, Dopamine Nation, and she
Yeah,
loves 12 step. And she was
yeah,
talking about pro-social shame. And I would have to say that that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't continue to relapse is I didn't want to have to do that.
no question.
But it makes me sad when
But there's
people,
the flip side of that, Arlena, because
yeah,
yes, certainly that ended up being something that I think added to the quiver of arrows that was pointing in the right direction for me this time around, my third honest attempt at recovery. But on the flip side of that, I stayed out for so long also because of that, right?
yeah,
Because when I did relapse, I didn't want to, I was in my early 20s and I didn't want to have to come back and say that.
yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah,
I hated doing it. It was so
yeah,
humiliating. It was embarrassing.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm like, don't look at me.
No,
But
and we don't do that in our home group. Our home group is, if
oh, that's
literally
nice.
if you've ever showed up one time, you're no longer a newcomer, right? And
Okay.
yeah, that's it. Just it's shame is not a useful thing in recovery.
No, and I love what Brene Brown says about shame. She says empathy is the antidote to shame.
No
And being
question.
empathetic to somebody, like sometimes when people relapse, they get those questions, or what are you going to do different this time? It's like, fuck you.
Absolutely.
I'm not talking to you. That's what I'm not doing.
No
I
question.
don't,
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's problematic. So stay away from those people. All right, let's talk like some practical fundamental stuff like cravings. How do you talk to your family and friends? Maybe we should just take these one at a time. How did you handle cravings in the beginning?
I mean, honestly, it was not perfect. And so I didn't quit smoking right away, quit nicotine right away. And so I'm going to tell you, like, the first like 6 months, I, probably smoked more than I should have.
Hmm.
Um, and indulged in some less harmful, at least at that point, in terms of life devastating behaviors. And I don't regret that. I also right away started uh, daily physical activity.
Oh God, that is the best.
Huge. Game changer.
Yeah. Okay, physical activity. I would also, what also I've learned, it's been a long time, so I don't really remember. I think I only had a few times. I would do two things. I've learned now that protein in the afternoon is really important. So
Yeah.
managing cravings through diet and exercise, like you were saying, I think exercise is probably the best thing you can do. They say that mood follows action. So if you
You
have a
got it.
craving, take some action. The other thing that really helped me in the beginning was talking to people. And it's sort of, I have this self-centered nature about me anyway. So I would reach out to people because they would say, "Oh, if you're having a craving, call me." And I was like, "Oh, but I don't want to bother you." And they would say things like, "Yeah, but when you call me, you're actually helping me because I can be of service. You're helping me get out of myself. I need you to call me." That's why we say the newcomers are the most important people in
No
the room because
question.
they're actually helping us to stay
They
sober,
sure are. They
and they
sure
don't
are.
even know it
Right.
just because they show up, they don't even realize that they're helping us to stay sober. So I would get on the phone and I would talk until I could process my feelings to resolution. So so we have three things.
Absolutely.
So physical activity,
You bet.
controlling protein in the afternoon.
Yeah, yeah, healthy. Just try to, introduce as much of a healthy diet as you can because it's the hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Speaking of which,
What?
sleep, sleep,
Ooh,
sleep, sleep. Prioritize sleep.
prioritize sleep. You want to hear something trippy? I was listening to the Huberman Lab podcast, and he was talking about neuroplasticity, which is
Mm,
learning. It happens during sleep.
yeah,
So he was like kids that are like he's a Stanford professor. He goes, his students come in, it's intense focus, and then a rest period. And in the rest period, if you can get sleep, that's where your brain is they call it connecting and pruning. So like your
Yeah,
neurons will actually connect more to the information and prune away stuff that you don't actually, that all happens when you're sleeping.
it is so important. It's foundational
Yeah.
to my recovery and certainly wasn't the beginning. Now, again, in the first 30 days, I was just like a bull in a china shop, going to a lot of meetings, like and the amount of nicotine that I was putting into my body, along with the amount of so I'd have coffee in the morning, and then I'd have energy drinks, and then I'd have like those 5 hour
Terrible.
energies, and I was just like,
Maybe
and then
maybe calm
why
down on the
can't I
caffeine.
sleep, right? And it's because I'm, mainlining caffeine and nicotine all day. So that being said, pretty early on I realized, okay, moderate on the caffeine, prioritize sleep,
Yeah.
prioritize daily physical activity. That makes a world of difference. Again, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, some people add stress to that. If I can prioritize those basic self-care things that I absolutely did not prioritize prior to getting into recovery, it makes a world of difference in terms of how I feel in my body.
Yeah. This is stuff that actually works.
Yeah,
This works.
it works.
It's so exciting. Let's talk a little bit about how to address family and friends and why that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. Now, everybody's gonna be a little bit different when it comes to their unique situation around family and friends. Some families, it's not going to be a secret, and some, it is. I think the friends is a big thing. If you've got a
Yeah.
lot of people that you're spending a lot of time with that are regular drinkers, regular substance users, and that's a big part of their life,
Hmm.
making that break is really important and not easy. And one of the biggest things that I learned right away is that I can love those people from a distance. So if there are people that I genuinely care about, and some of them you won't, and you'll know that right away. Some of them,
Yeah.
they were drinking buddies, they were using buddies,
Yeah.
and that's it.
I hear that a lot from women I coach. It's like, oh, but we have this family ritual and they bring wine. And I'm like, yeah, maybe ask them not to bring it.
Absolutely. No question. And
Yeah.
in the family stuff, I think what was huge for me was always having it out. Okay. So if I'm in a family situation and there's drinking, I always bring my own vehicle
Mm,
or my own mode of transportation to get there. And I always have a really good built-in reason to get out if I'm feeling uncomfortable. And for me, it was my dog. Like, I got to get home to Louie.
exit
And who's
strategy.
going to be like, no, you don't. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to
Yeah.
be like, okay, see ya. So always have a great way to be able to bail if you need to, both physically in terms of transportation, so you're not trapped in a situation where you're tempted or
Uh-huh.
triggered, and
Yeah.
then also just a great, verbal line that you can say that, allows you the reason to leave.
And bring your own drinks.
Yeah, honestly, I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times people have, right? They 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 pick something up or somebody hands them something, and
Yeah. And then they're done.
yep.
Yeah. Okay. The friends. I have found when I got sober, I didn't have any friends left. So I had to make all new friends. So, but I've heard people talk about how difficult it is to tell their friends. And so I'm going to say, tell your friends so that you don't arrive at a social situation and have to have the conversation in the situation. You like give them
Absolutely.
a heads up before you go out to dinner and go, hey, by the way, I just want to let you know I'm going alcohol free for a while. Like you don't have to make it a big heavy thing. People tend to receive information with the energy that you give it. So if you're
You
kind of
bet.
casual about it and you say, hey, I'm just gonna go, I'm doing the alcohol free challenge for a while. I'm gonna see if I can go 6 months or whatever you want to say. And just let them know. And then somewhere
Absolutely.
along the line, you can update them and go, you know what, I feel so good about this. I'm not drinking anymore ever
You
or
got it.
whatever.
You got it. And to your point, like, I think there's three categories, right? We've got the using drinking buddies where, that takes care of itself once you even
Right.
invoke the word like sober or, abstinence.
Alcohol
They're
free.
out.
Yeah.
They think you caught a disease and they don't want any part of it.
Right.
And they're telling their friends like, did you hear about Arlena? She got sober, right?
Yeah.
And they're a little worried that if they actually meet you again in person, they might catch it.
You
So
know what's
those
funny is I,
people,
I ran into an old boss. He was like my drinking buddy. Lord have mercy. Um, and years later, I ran into him again, and and he goes, "We all thought you got religious. We all thought you joined a like a religious cult." He goes, "We thought," and they avoided me like the plague. So funny. I was like, "No,
that's great. And
stupid."
Arlene, I love the fact I too didn't have any friends coming in. It was not a problem for me. Jason, the co-host of the Way Out podcast, it was different. He had a ton of friends, and which makes sense because he's just the best.
He's the best.
And he had a really hard time with that because he really cared for these people,
Oh, yeah.
and they were still in the life
Yeah.
and using and drinking every day. And so he always talks about he had to learn to love them from a distance.
Yeah, some of your friends will come along for the ride. I've coached women that are getting sober, and some of their friends are like, "Yeah, instead of going out to dinner, we'll just have lunch." Because, like, I guess drinks with dinner is a thing, but
Yeah,
not everybody drinks at lunch.
right.
You got iced tea or an Arnold Palmer or something. Arnold Palmer,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? Um, soda at lunch, and not everybody drinks at lunch. And it was just interesting. Or the neighborhood bunco group. Do you know what bunco is?
No.
It's a dice game that women play, and there's like three tables of four women, and they play dice. But they also call it drunko because
Oh,
they always bring wine. But I went to
of
one.
course they do.
Yeah, of course they do. So I went to the neighborhood bunco group, but I never drank, and half of them
Right.
didn't. So it was like not, and so you were so busy playing dice that for me, it wasn't a thing.
Right. Yeah,
I didn't care.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like trying to tell those, I was already sober, so nobody expected me to drink. But
You're right.
anyway, find different activities, I think was the point.
Yes, and that's the other thing, and super glad you mentioned that. Sobriety is a great opportunity to rediscover or discover things that you are interested in and
Yeah,
enjoy doing. So we talk
exactly.
about how important it is to fill up that vacuum of time. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Yes.
Let's fill that time with good stuff that makes us
Yeah.
feel good. That can be going to 12-step meetings. That can be picking up a hobby that was long lost. That can be
Yeah.
discovering new hobbies. But that piece is huge, I think.
Yeah. I interviewed this guy who was the founder of the Phoenix. It's like a
Mm,
sober community.
yeah, the
And
Phoenix is great.
yeah, and it's a group of people who do sober activities together, and all you need is 24 hours
It's so
sober
great.
to
Yeah, we
participate.
interviewed Michelle Sandoval a while back from the Phoenix, who runs a D&D group.
Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah,
Fun. My son
yeah,
is super into that.
yeah. Mine is too.
Oh, nice. Michelle Sand.
I
Okay,
think
so she's
in another world, in another time, in another dimension, I probably could have too. But in the '90s, it wasn't cool like it is now. Like Dungeons and Dragons was super nerdy, like not in a good
yeah,
way in the
not in a good
90s.
way. Yeah. Now
A and
it's
B, I was far too busy partying and to ever
we were in
involve
our own kind of
myself.
dungeon.
100, yes, yeah, I was in a very different kind of dungeon,
Yeah,
battling a very different kind of dragon.
exactly. A lot less fun
Yes.
sometimes. Okay, so rediscovering hobbies. You know what's interesting is when that book Dopamine Nation, they talk about addiction being a narrowing of interests. Like there's like your brain starts to hardwire your dopamine circuit around a narrowing of activities. And when the drinking and using was gone, suddenly like it takes a minute for your dopamine reward system to heal. Like your
Takes a
brain needs a
while.
minute to heal. So I've often heard that the beginning of sobriety is boring. Like they're sort of, they miss the excitement and the addiction of the drama.
Absolutely.
But so it takes, just know that it takes a minute for your brain to heal. But then all this, a whole new world. Listen, I have way too many hobbies. Like I have so many hobbies.
Yeah.
It's
Yes, but there
ridiculous.
is, and you can allow yourself to explore those hobbies. Well, to your point, Our Lady, giving yourself some grace around the fact that it's going to take a while for our brains to heal and adjust to daily life without substances, and just slamming our opioid receptors, slamming our dopamine receptors. It's gonna take a little bit.
Yeah, and the caffeine and like just all the things. It just your neurochemistry actually heals pretty quickly. But just know that I think if people are prepared for it, they go, oh, the beginning's going to be boring, but it's going to straighten out.
You got it. And we'll talk about this when we talk about some of the causes and conditions in terms of substance use susceptibility.
Hmm.
Many of us came into using substances with a deficiency already
Oh,
in our
right.
brains.
Yeah. That's medicated.
And yeah,
Oh, yeah. I think that's a way more compassionate way to view it.
it's and it is. And I'm excited to talk about it because I think when we view it in that more holistic lens, in the
Hmm.
context of everything that we have experienced up to the point where we first use substances, it
Hmm.
starts to make a lot more sense why we did
Yeah.
what we did.
That's big. Answering well, why? Like that's a common question I hear in the beginning.
It's
I had that. It's like, why am I like this?
totally, it's the first question out of my mouth after I vomited my entire substance abuse history and basically trauma history to
Yeah.
my treatment counselor. She's like, what do you want to get out of this thing? And I said, I want to know why I am the way I am. And she laughed at me and she says, okay, let's say we figure it out. Let's say it's because your mom died when you were 11, or that you had big addicts and alcoholic switches just waiting to be tripped, or a combination of the two. Do you think you'll ever be able to use safely again if you figure that out? No. Do you think you'll be able to drink normally again? No. Good. Should we figure out how we get better
Yeah.
instead of why you are the way you are? And again, I think about it as, if your house is on fire, the first order of business is to put the fire out. And
Yeah.
then we can go about the business of figuring out how it started.
Yeah.
But let's
Yeah.
put the fire out first, shall we?
Shall we? Yeah. Seems legit. That checks out.
Does check out. Look, I tried to figure out what was wrong with me many times while I was slamming my body with ethyl alcohol and various other mood altering
Mm.
substances. And because they wall me off from myself
Mm.
and create this impenetrable wall from myself, I'll never be able to figure it out. I didn't even know what most emotions felt like, really sober. Like,
Yeah,
I have to reconnect to myself on some level before I can do any of that work.
absolutely. You know what's funny? The analogy I like to use is when I first got sober, I like would have these feelings and I'm like, I do not know what this is. Right. And it's like, you ever see those old-timey pictures of the switchboard operators?
Yeah.
It's always like the sepia picture and the girl always has like some tight updo hair thing. But there's like a wall of holes and she's got a series of plugs. And to me, it was like, the plug was like, oh, I'm having a feeling, but I don't know what it is. I don't know which hole to put it in. And it was like, what is like, I was not able to identify my feelings. And I would call my sponsor or my friend or whatever, and I'd be like, I'm feeling some kind of way. I don't know what it is. And we talk about it. And because they had already gone through the process, they were able to identify, oh, I think that might be loneliness. I think you might be having some kind of shame. I think this sounds like guilt, or this sounds like you're just uncomfortable, like you're trying avoidance, where you have pain avoidance. It was like so helpful. But that's what the
Absolutely.
beginning, 30, 90 days, I was like trying to identify feelings as they were arising, and I just didn't know what they were. It's
No
confusing.
question about it. Yes, it's new for us because many of us have been suppressing those feelings, numbing those feelings for so long, with or without substances, because I did both.
Hmm.
I could push them down without substances, but obviously I use substances routinely to numb out and escape those feelings. So it absolutely is a process that takes a while to identify what different feelings feel like in my body, what those feelings are, and then strategies that work for me in order to be able to move through those feelings in an increasingly healthier way.
Yeah. One of the steps is prayer and meditation, and meditation was always very elusive to me. So, geez, but now we have all kinds of like there's meditation groups, there's YouTube, there's
Yeah,
um so many Insight Timer, the Waking Up app. There's like Headspace. There's so many apps to help you to be present so that
mm,
you can identify the feeling as it arises and then process it to resolution.
absolutely.
So when you talk about causes and conditions, it's like, okay, first we get out of the house, we put out the fire, and then I think the why am I like this is kind of leads to the getting professional help and doing
Yeah,
the deep trauma therapy.
absolutely. No question about it, Arlene. I think many of us can benefit from embarking upon a journey that includes some sort of professional help around trauma and mental health. Certainly, that was the case for me. And to set the table in terms of why this could be so helpful for us, I think it's an instructive thing to talk a little bit about what we learn in the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. So, childhood experiences. Take one step back for a second here. So,
Hmm.
for many years, we believed and hoped that our genes were going to be the answer to everything.
Oh yeah.
That, as Bill Clinton said in one very important speech, that once we map the human genome, we're going to be able to solve all sorts of diseases and cure everything from cancer to addiction and mental illness. What we've learned since then is that genes are very adaptive to the environment. Okay. So genes aren't a hard coded necessarily to do one specific thing. They're very adaptable and responsive to our environment.
Yeah.
And if we are in an environment and we have experiences that are adverse, that's going to impact our genes in an adverse way. And I think it's important to understand that, for me anyway, as I look at this, we all do the best we can with what we have at the time. And so, although I know that my experiences were adverse in a variety of different ways in my childhood, the shame and blame are not a helpful dynamic in this process or in my own journey. But adverse childhood experiences will impact the way that your body and
Mm-hmm.
your mind respond to the world. If I am a child that has some um, lack of bonding from an emotional perspective with my primary caregivers, that could be because my caregivers are emotionally unavailable. That could be because my caregivers are just straight not there.
Right.
That could be because my caregivers were abusive, or I suffered some other trauma that will have a permanent and lasting impact on the development of my brain.
Right.
Because I don't have the tools at that age to be able to cope with those experiences and the stress they put my brain under. And some of the ways that manifests is a much more difficult time managing stress,
Right.
less dopamine receptors in my brain, so
Mm-hmm.
that I am, as a baseline, less motivated, um, less less emotionally well.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are contributors or lasting impacts of adverse childhood experiences on the developing brain. And I think about it like, if I'm not getting the emotion, if an infant isn't getting the emotional needs met, and that's a primary need, right, in human development, is emotional safety and security and development. If that's not being met, then those parts of my brain are being impacted in that way, and they're
Oh,
not being developed. And so I have a harder time sustaining relationships
right.
because they're not as rewarding, because my brain didn't develop in that way. Just like if you were to put a baby, if you literally don't pick a baby up ever, it has a almost 100% chance of dying,
Yeah.
because it needs it. It needs that, right? So
Yeah.
um, when I first then consume a mood altering substance, it does something different to my brain
Right.
than it does to somebody that doesn't have that brain difference.
Yeah.
That So it feels, instead of taking a drink of water and that water feels good, feels like refreshing water, it feels like I haven't drank in 100 days.
Right. Yeah.
And it is bringing me back to, at once and for all, a level that my brain has always wanted to be at but could never do it on its own.
Yeah, I have a an example of how that affected me. So I grew up with a mom that was, there was always, a roof over my head and food on the table and, a safe place to live. But I was like emotionally neglected. She was busy.
Yeah,
She was busy, and so this is not a blame thing. But what ended up happening is I sort of developed this internal belief system that I was not worthy, and so that I needed to perform in order to get the attention and nurturing that I needed. Right. So I developed
absolutely.
this pattern of performance that still kind of haunts me today. I've been able to sort of work with it in a different way. But when I feel not good enough or alone or not safe, unconsciously, like, my pattern is to then go into workaholism mode and
Yeah.
overwhelm my feelings with activities. That's why I have too many hobbies, right? That's they're not detrimental anymore. But do you know what I mean? Like, that
Absolutely.
is my brain developed in this. There is a great book called What Happened to You, which is a slightly different question of what's wrong with you.
Yep.
And Dr.
Yep.
Bruce Perry is he's an MD child psychologist that did brain scans that showed how children develop their neurology develops differently if they're emotional and don't have that physical safety,
Bingo.
right? And then so what happens is we don't have great relationships. We don't work like it's hard to hold a job, hard to have a relationship. We don't manage money very well. So that's how that's how, and then, so all this stuff creates stress. And then what do we do to deal with the stress? Bad things.
You got it. And think
Yeah.
about this cycle, Arlena, that you just laid out in that example. If I have a brain that is fundamentally deficient in dopamine because of some basic lack of emotional development that didn't occur, and then I discover things that allow me to feel okay, my brain is going to seek that out like a heat-seeking missile. Our brains are tremendous problem solvers, and once our brains identify something that works, it just wants to do it over and over again because our brains want to reach homeostasis.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if they've been deprived for however long for any variety of adverse childhood experiences, trauma, stress, and finally reach that homeostasis from a behavior pattern or a substance or both, we're going to go back to that well over and over and over again because it's going to produce the dopamine our brains are hardwired to require and crave.
Right.
And if it's substances, it can be even worse because many substances will then inhibit increasingly those dopamine receptors. So if we started out with not very many,
Yeah.
and then we're engaging in a substance that then over a period of time reduces those even further, it increases the dependence.
Right. Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. You
So
know, I
why does that
learned.
make sense, right? So you talk about, and Gabor Mate says, not why the addiction, why the pain?
Well, yeah, yeah, I love that. Why the pain? So addressing the pain is where we heal so that we don't have to keep going back to those old patterns.
Absolutely. And it's less about trying to say, well, this is why I'm broken, and
Yeah.
this is why,
Wounded, not broken.
yeah, right. And that's the way I thought about it in my, yes, but this is why I use, this is why I drink, this is why I do what I do. It's more about for me anyway, giving myself some grace and some understanding. Boy, that makes sense why substances felt so good.
Yeah, it makes
And I
sense.
wanted to use them a lot because they
Yeah,
worked,
because
because
it
they
worked.
worked.
Yeah, we needed some relief.
And I didn't
Yeah.
have any other way to be able to achieve homeostasis
Otherwise.
outside of that.
Yeah, so good. Listen, I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I feel
We
like we hit all the,
did.
yeah, we hit all the bullets there.
Arlita, my favorite part of this interview was when you had to rein me in there, Charlie. Charlie, I'm going to need you to look at the camera.
Look at the camera.
And we actually record video, so if you
I
could,
publish video. Yeah.
if you could, you could
I
look at
don't
the
know where you're
camera.
at,
That'd
but
be.
come on back. Come on
I'm
back
gonna
because we
need
love.
you to focus here.
I mean, you were very focused,
That
but
was
as self-centered as I am, I'm like, come back to me.
it's
Focus
great.
on me.
Favorite part. No, not even close.
So funny. Well, listen, this has been great as always. I always love our chats. I learn so much, and I always get that warm, fuzzy feeling like, yeah, this is what we needed to talk about today.
Yeah, this was great. You are, as always, the best.
Back at you. If you spot it, you got it. All right, my friend. Well, until next time, thank you so much.
Arlene, I can't wait. And again, your episode's coming out. I don't know when this is going to be published, but your episode's hot to drop, and I can't wait for it to drop because it was a tremendous episode, all about hopefully giving folks a chance, to take a second look at the
Yeah,
12 steps.
yeah. A worthy endeavor.
Indeed.
Well, thanks so much. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, Arlena.
Thanks. One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.